first line of a poem.
Hey everybody, this is Al. This is week 10. It's 8 p.m. here in Philly. Davey thought that he would wear his pajamas tonight because, quote unquote,
It's past my bedtime.
but it's not really past your bedtime. Anyway, we're in Philly. We're very happy to be here. Sitting to my right, your left, is a rookie at the table. Jonah!
Hello,
It's
everyone.
Jonah! Actually, oops, I dropped my pen. Jonah is here until I ask someone else to come. Chris, can you give me a little less in-room volume? Until Jonah gets to cycle off, somebody else will come. It could be Ujwala. It could be. It could be. It could be Jamie. It could be Jamie. Anyway, they're all here. And Anna is here. Hello, Anna.
Hello.
Hello. And we have Davey, the aforementioned.
Hello, Al.
And we have Jason, who's in the first row, who has a mic or doesn't have a mic?
I have a mic.
Oh, fantastic. I'm really glad. And we have Amber Rose, who's on the phone. Amber Rose.
Hi, Al.
Hello, my friend. 610-618. Anybody?
3208.
610-616-3208. 610-616-3208. Give us a call. I'm going to have a couple of announcements. And Dave Poplar is here. Dave, I know you're there. We can't see you. You want to try to say hello?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Hey, Dave. There you are. Hey.
It's Dave.
Good to see you. Okay, couple of announcements, and then we're going to get started. First, Final Words Webcast. So this is our last regular week substantive syllabus-driven webcast. Not that these webcasts are driven by anything, but yeah, so today's the last one of those. And then Monday is our special Final Words Webcast. It starts at 10:30 a.m. Here. Of course, they're all here, except for the ones that are not, at 10:30 a.m. Philly time. Please make every effort to join us. Please make every effort to join us because, there's Dave's dog. Your dog's name is Pops?
Pep.
Pep, that's right. Hi, Pep. Yeah, so what was I saying? Yes, final words. So please join us, and if you can possibly get to Philly, please come. Please come, be here in person. Everybody gets a final word. That's all that happens. We just go around and everybody gets a final thought about ModPo, about the poetry, a poet that you wanted us to talk about, but we didn't get to, and you feel it's important to mention, a moment in ModPo this year or previous years, something you learned, something that made you sad, something that made you happy. Final words. Everybody gets a final word, and we'll be taking phone calls. All right. I will be putting up a thread for final words on the site in ModPo, probably Friday, and I will make an announcement, and everybody will be invited to post their final words to that thread. So we'll have final words from people far-flung that way. Mandana asked me to announce a New York City meetup this coming Saturday, November 17th at the New York Public Library at 12 noon. This is the 53rd Street branch between 5th and 6th Avenues. All right, 2 more shout-outs, and then we're going to go to the phone and get started. I just wanted to thank, and I'm going to do this again at Final Words, but I wanted to thank the community TAs, the CTAs. They're volunteers. They're amazing. They do a huge amount of work, And I'm going to list some of them. This is a very risky thing to do when I'm feeling this much gratitude, to actually name people, because there's a risk that I will not be naming some people I should be naming. There are many more CTAs than the ones I'm going to name. I apologize if I don't name you, but it's one thing to fear not naming someone and therefore say no names. And it's another thing to risk not naming someone and then saying a name, because hearing your name said, there's something, Jonah, how does it feel to be Jonah? How Jonah?
Fantastic.
It feels much better than, hey, you, thank you very much, you, whoever you are. So we love them all, and they're all over the world. Sharon Wells, who's half the time on a boat, Michelle Bethke, Suzanne Margano, who I think might be first time. Yeah, so she's great. Magdalena Castani, who's, I think, a long-time ModPo, or maybe first time. I think she's in Greece or Cyprus. Oh, I probably made a huge international goof there by just mixing those two. But anyway, Magdalena is fantastic. Laura Di Bernardi from Australia, MC Catanese, who I believe is from the Jersey Shore. Nicholas Stern, Terry Reef, I believe it's Reef, not Rife. Terry Talty, Anthony Watkins, of course, Holly York, Sharon Ingraham, we know her as S.E., Meredith Lederer, who's really been very active, T. De Los Reyes in Manila, Nadia Gent, Bill Spear from the middle of the country, a fantastic ModPoer, Jeremy Dixon from Wales, Nicola Quinn, somewhere in the UK, I believe also from Wales, Mary Armour from South Africa, Mandana, New York, Massimo Saranzio is a teacher in Italy, Ray Maxwell in DC, Sanjeev Naik, who moved somewhere during ModPo, moved back to India, Chris Foreman in Los Angeles, Kathy D, Nathan Kaufman, I believe is in Chicago, Alana Shaw on the West Coast, Mark Hardwick, no, that's Mary Hardwick, Virgil Houston, Veterans Day, happy Veterans Day, Virgil Houston, an Afghanistan war vet. Allison Borofska, of course. Matt Corey, also Chicago. Dennis Aguinaldo in the Philippines. Robin Keller, who's now in Los Angeles. Eleanor Smagorinsky, Australia. John Kamish, who's in Seattle. Sally Shakti Willow, whom we met in London. Yep, who went out drinking with us. Marcus Balassi, we also met in London. Thank you all. You guys make ModPo really a community, so thank you very much. Okay, one quick shout out to someone else, and then I'm going to just list the poems. We'll get started. And there's someone on the phone. We will go to someone on the phone. Thank you, Davey. Yeah, one of these days I'm not going to show up. And guess who is going to run things?
Anna.
Probably not, actually. I'm a good dep, you know.
But you're not going to run shit if you don't talk into the mic. I mean, you get
First
this,
off the bench.
I'm talking into the mic.
Now you are, but you have to. There's like a dance here, you know. Like, okay, look, here's
No,
a
remember
shout out.
Lily
You
did it
just
for us
stole
that
the.
one time.
You stole the show. I was going to do a shout out. You have this way. Carol Groves. I just really, really, really am enjoying watching Carol Groves do ModPo. I'm just amazed. She really, I guess, struggled with the experimental poetry. I mean, let's face it, most of us encounter poetry. It's as simple as could be. It's straightforward. It's usually not in a poetics unit in school. It's usually associated with thematic things. So if you're studying, I don't know, cowboys, they give you cowboy poetry. That was such a bad example. Anyway, there is such a thing as cowboy poetry. Anyway, so Carol Groves. So she gets to chapter 9.2 to the aleatory poetry, which is really, for a lot of people, the hardest thing to think, oh, that's beautiful. No, it's not sometimes for a lot of people, right? And here's what she wrote, and I was very, 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 very moved by it, and I think I posted it to Facebook, so forgive me if you're hearing it a second time. This is during last week. Having started this week floundering and way outside my previous very limited experience of experimental poetry, thanks to the range of texts and the enthusiasm, energy, and quality of the discussions, yay, and the poem talks, yay, and contributions to the discussion threads, I think I now have some appreciation of aleatory poetry. The possibilities for experimenting with the process are really exciting. She loved Bernadette's writing experiments, and then she writes something that I will cherish always. Never did I think I would feel confident enough to make any kind of comment. And then she goes on to make a comment on Joan Retallack's poem, Not a Cage. Never did I think I would feel confident enough. That's it. That's all any teacher, any convener needs to hear. I mean, that is the standard for learning. The standard for learning is not that you started at point A and you get to point C and therefore you're rewarded for having made some achievement, or you come in really, really knowledgeable and at the end you're still really, really knowledgeable, which happens a lot in college. Kids, students, undergraduates take courses in topics they're already good at. Yeah. No, Carol Groves did ModPo and never felt she could be confident enough to make a comment on an aleatory poem, and she did. And it was a brilliant comment on Joan Retallack. So I asked her if it was all right if I would share that with Joan. And she said yes, and I shared it with Joan. And Joan wrote this smushy, and I hope Joan's not watching, but I just want to say Joan is not the smushiest person in the world. She's very cerebral, very Cajun, actually. She wrote this smushy Valentine, just wrote this email back like, that is so fantastic, and she praised ModPo, and so it was a great triangulation, and it's rare that teachers get to be one part of the triangle. So thank you, Carol. Thank you so much. Okay, here are the poems, then we're going to go to the phone. So we got several pieces by Tracy Morris, who was here on Monday. Tracy was. Jennifer Scapatone, who was here today, recorded 2 ModPo Plus videos that we're going to use. One of them on her own piece, which is a kind of a riff on Whitman. It's a visual collage poem Whitman thing, which we're probably going to put in Chapter 2 for Whitmanians, though Anna was voting for Chapter 10. And the other piece we talked about was?
A small poem by the Baroness called X-Ray.
Baroness von Elsa von Freitag Loringhoven wrote a poem called X-Ray, which is really a killer poem.
Super weird.
And we just, wow. So that's going to be added to week 4, the Stein week. Okay, Rosemarie Waldrop does an N+7 substitutions on the Declaration of Independence. That's fun. Mike McGee, a flarfist at the time, rewrites the Pledge of Allegiance and then writes a kind of a flarfy version of Susan Howe's My Emily Dickinson. It's called My Angie Dickinson. Caroline Bergvall, Via. It's a series of Dante translations. No doubt we'll talk about that. Erica Baum, who thinks of herself as a photographer-poet, takes pictures of language and their poems. And they really are, and she's amazing. Christian Buck writes Eunoia, in which, Davy, he does what? This is hard. Oh, I stumped you.
In which he writes poems that each one has only one vowel.
Right, so a long chapter, really, of prose, using only words that use a vowel, like, for instance, the letter E. Very difficult to do. Kenny Goldsmith has Soliloquy, in which he records one side of a week's conversation. Of course, anyone want to guess which side? His side. ModPo Plus, Rachel Loden, I Know a Brand, which is a riff on Creeley. We might play for Yucks. Lainey Brown's Daily Sonnets, love, love, love them. Jaap Blanc, What the President Will Do and Say and Do. What the President Will Say and Do. We should play that. And some more Tracy Morris. So lots to talk about. It's conceptualism night here at the Writer's House. Amber Rose, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
Who is on the phone? Oh, I see Max. Hi, Max.
Wait, can you hear me on this mic?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We can, although Chris is a genius and can bring you up.
All right, so on the phone we have Phillip calling from Austin, Texas.
Okay. Hello, Phillip. How are you?
I had an epiphany, just like that Carol in your last little letter you read there.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. It's about conceptual poetry, which, as you know, I have struggled with for 8 solid years now.
So where are you at now? I mean, where are you at?
I read your essay about Lainey Brown's Daily Sonnets.
Oh,
okay?
someone read that essay. Thank you, Phil.
Yes, and I found it most illuminating for you to make associations of word by word of her sonnets. Okay.
Yeah, and for the rest of everybody who didn't read my essay, that includes you, Davy Niddle. Sorry, you probably did because you read everything. That poem is called, is it 5/14?
6/14.
6/14 sonnet.
6/14.
So Lainey Brown is raising 2 kids who are now grown and off to college, but whatever, they weren't then, and they're all over the house, and they keep her from writing her poems, and she can only write 6 lines of a 14-line sonnet. because she's a harried mom. So she has a choice. She won't write sonnets and therefore won't be in the literary tradition, or she'll say, fuck it, I'll write as much as I can because I'm a harried mom. So daily sonnets are sonnets that you can manage to write if you are a woman home alone with 2 kids while dad is working. And the daily sonnet I wrote about is a rewriting of a John Donne sonnet in which Donne is like the master of the fucking universe. Sorry for my French. Right? So
Right.
daily sonnets is like this really cool feminist project in which it's like the perfect thing for this chapter. Okay, Phil, so what's your question?
Well, here's the thing, Al. So I really read your little thing here about how you took each word in the first line. I am a liturgy, worsted, made cupidity.
Right.
And compared it against John Donne's original line, okay?
Yes.
And so I started really thinking about that and saying, okay, well, what associations do I make from that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so I got that word worsted, right?
Yeah.
And it reminded me of a scripture, right? So Isaiah 25:7, speaking about sin and to God, it said, in this mountain he will do away with the shroud that is enveloping all the peoples and the covering that is woven over all the nations.
Yeah.
Now, I have no idea whether the poet had any intention of making such an association, but I made it. And light bulb finally went on for me, Al. That's what you've been talking about.
Yeah, Phil, that's cool. So 8 years later, you got
language, the open poetry. We make the meaning. That's why these poems are so useful.
Eureka! Oh, okay.
Ding, ding, ding.
Phil, we're applauding you here. There's something happening in Austin. Yes, sir. You are right. You are totally right. And that's a brilliant use of the scripture. And what you really need to do is write your own daily sonnet. I think you should. You spend too much of your day as a therapist helping other people out. Maybe you should spend some time writing your own. You can do your own therapist daily sonnet series. Anyway, that's a great point, Phil. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to hang up and listen to. But don't hang up yet because I have a book for you. But I want you to listen to the answers that we give here, or responses. Meantime, I
would like to hang on because I'm not at a computer, so I'd like I'm
going to ask you to hang up and watch it later then, so other people can call tonight.
That's fine.
But before you hang up, here's your book. You ready?
Oh.
Okay. We're going to send this to you. So Eileen Tabios is a Filipino-American poet, and she has really, I think I've talked about her work previously. And this is a chapbook published by Tinfish Press, which is Susan Schultz Press that's in Hawaii. And it's called Excavating the Filipino in Me, and it's a beautiful book. And we'll send it to you, Phil. So thank you, and thanks for telling us about the Eureka moment.
All right.
All right. Take care.
I'm working doing final words, but a poem from that great Ray Abendroth book you sent me is going to be my final words. So I'm going to call it into the voicemail. Okay.
Okay. Good. We'll listen to the voicemail. Thank you, Phil Drexler. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Davey, Jonah, and Max. What happened to Phil? What do you think's going on there? This is a revelation of some kind. He was very excited about how he kind of discovered his own ability to create uncreatively in the middle of all this. Davey, Jonah, Max.
That's something that was helpful about Phil's relationship to Lainey Brown's daily sonnet is something that pushes on conversations we have between week 9 and week 10, is that if folks are writing a daily project or an everyday life project or a project that's drawing the language from their daily lives, that language is super different depending on what your life is. That dailiness is super uneven. That the language I encounter is just different language from the language that you encounter. Actually, it's a lot of the same language. But it's that necessarily the idiom of dailiness Hi. Look at you. Necessarily, the idiom of dailiness has the stamp of the personal on it. And so to read a poem that's about an experience of translating one person's canonical dailiness, Dunn's, into someone else's, Lainey Brown's, makes other things available for Philip Drexler that are bouncing around in his ear, that helps him think about how his daily language is, in this case, scriptural. That the daily is connective, both because we all experience it and because it's uneven, it's not shared.
Yeah.
And that's useful.
Yeah. Jonah, just a thought from me, and then I want to hear what you have to say, and then Max. There's a lineage here, Davey. I mean, Bernadette Mayer basically gave Lainey Brown permission, as Lainey would put it, permission to do this.
Yep.
Just right. If the kids, you can't wait till the kids are grown, then you won't be a poet anymore. You can't wait. You got to do it. And the way to do it is to live the life the way you live it, and that gets to count for poetry. It's a basic, for Bernadette, a basic part of a feminist project. Yep. And it's kind of like passing it on, right? And, after a while, it's going to get to Philip Drexler 8 years later, after studying this stuff, realizing he's free. He's been made free by these women. Bernadette Mayer, as we know, people in this room studied her very closely. Jamie, for instance, she had 3 kids and a husband who was perfectly good guy, was gone a lot, and she just made something of it. The poems are all lemonade made from lemons. Yeah. Jonah.
Thank you for your comment, Philip. I also have struggled with conceptualism, especially this past week, and so it's good to hear that I'm not alone in that. But I think what I appreciate so much about the sonnet that you pointed us to is, and this kind of is building off of Davy's point, the language of I am made, and this kind of process of being constituted by all these things that we encounter in our everyday life, this outside, inside, and it kind of opens up the poem and it invites these readings that are not necessarily on the page.
Yeah. Jonah, everybody, that was great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Ujwala, you're up next. Come on, take the seat here. Yeah, you can do it. Thank you, Jonah, so much. Max, your thoughts on this?
I think Davy's comment was excellent about encountering the unevenness of daily life, or the difference of somebody's dailiness versus yours, and how that kind of calls attention to what's unique about one's routine. I think that we see the quotidian throughout all of these week 10 poems, all of these conceptual poems. I think that's something that unites them, and I think a lot of these poets are in their own way kind of dealing with questions about daily life and questions about routines in a way that can be very very relatable once you realize that's what they're doing, as Philip did.
Yeah. Thanks, Max.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Guess who just popped up in the forums?
Who?
Dan Bergman.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dan, tell Dan hello.
Dan says, Dan wanted to chime in.
Is he watching the?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dan wanted to chime in and says, actually, for me, it's the confluence of the meanings we bring and the poet, the meanings we bring and the poet provides that expands our world.
Oh, Dan.
Dan Bergman.
Love you, Dan. Hello. Where have you been? Actually, Dan is a student at Harvard now, and that kicks ass.
It does.
And by the way, speaking of my cursing, and we're going to the phone, Ray Maxwell says on Twitter, Big Al, you say fucking too fucking much. Now, the first fucking is in quotes because he's quoting me, but then the second fucking is Ray being, expressing solidarity. Then he says, Mrs. Kennedy, fifth grade teacher who followed us to the sixth grade, would say profanity indicates a limited vocabulary. Well, I would say that's appropriate in week 10 to have a limited vocabulary. I think every fourth word should fucking be a word like fucking, I think. And that would be a great little constraint exercise. Okay. Anyway, Ray, I know you're being funny because you like to drop the F-bomb too. Amber Rose.
Yes, we have lots of callers tonight. Okay, and on the phone right now we have Chris calling from LA.
Chris.
Yes.
Chris Foreman. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Al. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to hear your voice.
Thank you.
I have a book of poems for you.
I'm so excited. What's the book?
You're really going to like this, Chris. So this is called Snowline, and it's by Donato Mancini. And the book consists, each page has a line about snow. I'm going to read a couple of them. It will remind you of Caroline Bergval's Via. You'll see why. I'm just going to open it randomly. Okay. But where are they, the snows of yore? 1935. But where are the snows that fell last year? 1937. It's called Snowline. But where are the snows of other years? 1938. But where are the snows of yesteryear? That's the standard one, 1952. But last year's snow, where has it gone? 1957. But where are the snows of bygone years? 1960, and so forth. You're going to have one of these. And Donato, I forgot to have Donato sign it. He was here recently. Anyway, how do you like that, Chris?
Thank you, Al. That is right up my street, as I think you know. Very exciting.
I do know. And so you're into this this kind of experiment, but you're in LA where there's no snow, so you need, and we're supposed to get snow tomorrow. Chris, can you believe it?
Yeah, I saw that on the news.
What? By the way, Anna has something to announce that has to do with Los Angeles.
Oh, we're coming to Los Angeles. Was that the thing?
Oh,
I don't know.
cool.
We are.
I'm assuming that was the thing.
Yeah. What's the date of the meetup?
January 18th.
18th, which is a
18th.
Friday?
Yes.
Chris, I hope you're not going to be in London or anything. We're going to be there, and I want you to come.
I will be there.
Okay. So it's going to be Zach, Chris, Anna, and myself. We're going to be out there in LA. We're also going to San Francisco. So.
Oh, cool.
I think one time we were in San Francisco, and you almost drove up there to see us. Am I misremembering that?
No, you're right. You were at Coursera, and I was meant to come, and I had a minor medical thing and didn't make it.
Okay. Well, this time we'll see you. Anyway, you've probably wanted for the last 10 minutes to ask a question.
Well, I guess I have a comment, and I'll lead with the opposite approach to Phil's. I have loved this conceptual poetry from the first time I discovered it 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so what I did this morning was, knowing that today was our day to talk about it, I took Kenny Goldsmith's Day off my shelf.
You have a copy of Day?
I do. I got it from a used and rare bookseller.
It's really hard to find. Wow, big blue thing. It's like a doorstop.
Big blue book. Let me see. I think it does have page numbers, so it's 836 pages long.
Right. And I'll just stipulate for people who don't know the book, I have a copy of it upstairs. So Goldsmith retyped. He didn't scan. He photo reproduce. He retyped all the text in one day's New York Times, partly as a way of demonstrating that when we say, yeah, I read the Times, you didn't, because it's tiny type and it's 900 pages. So, that was that experiment. And this was where he made the claim, which a lot of people think is bullshit, but it's part of the bullshit shtick. He made the claim that nobody really reads my poems. That's sort of pure conceptualism in the sense that conceptualism is about thinking of an idea that would lead to making art and then not worrying particularly much about what happens to the art. So that's weird. Anyway, go ahead, Chris.
What I found interesting was, what was the outcome of this, just in terms of bulk, beginning with bulk. So there are 6 sections,
right.
National, local, business, sports, arts and entertainment, and classified. And 2 of them are much longer than any of the others, and those are the business section and the arts and entertainment section.
That's fascinating.
And I just kind of thought, well, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, what do you think?
Why should that be?
Yeah, well, I know why the business section is long. And that crazy guy retyped all of the numbers because the Times used to reproduce the stock prices.
Exactly. And what he did in entertainment was essentially something similar, which is to retype all of the movie titles, the theaters where they were showing, the show times, description of the movies, And that's what takes up most of this space.
Yeah. It's an insane project, yes?
It's a completely insane project. And yet, I think I mentioned to you that I'm taking a very, very introductory class called Start Writing Poetry at the moment. And what I've kind of realized is I've had a good writing session if something emerged at the end of the half hour that I couldn't have predicted in advance. And I think that's kind of true of these conceptual efforts as well. You don't necessarily know what's going to come out of it, even if you have the idea going in.
Yeah.
Something comes out via the process.
Right. And that's sort of a paradox or a big lie about conceptualism because, many of the conceptualists have a project in mind and then they wind up doing something different, even though they were supposedly bound by a constraint.
Yes.
That's very cool. Chris, what I'm going to do is ask you to hang up and listen to the responses so somebody else can call. And I'm going to reframe your comment into a question for some of the people here.
Thank you.
All right? And we will be in touch about LA. We'll see you out there.
Excellent.
And
I'll see you there.
make sure Amber Rose gets your address, although I think we have it. We can mail the book to you.
Great. I'm looking forward to that and to seeing you. Thanks, Al.
Okay, Chris. Thank you so much. Chris Foreman from Los Angeles. All right, here's the question I want to ask, and I want Ujwala, Anna, Dave, and Amber Rose to respond. Okay, it is a crazy idea. It's nuts. I mean, I don't know how many years it took him to retype that New York Times, but why? What could possibly... I mean, maybe your answer is he shouldn't have done it. That's stupid. What a waste of time. But why is the question? What could possibly be gained by that effort, a huge effort? Now, I'll just throw in there that Christian Buck wrote Eunoia. It took him 7 years to do it because it was so hard to find all the words and make them make some sense. Sure. That's a similar effort, but also different in the sense that Goldsmith was doing something pretty mindless. He would argue it's not. It's very hard to retype something. But yeah. Okay, so Anna, Ujwala, Dave, and Amber Rose.
I mean, there's a lot of ways we can attack this question. One thing I'll say is exactly what you just said about Christian Book. There is, I think, one nice contrast from the conceptual work we see this week in contrast with last week, where a lot of the work of writing the poems or generating the poems kind of comes from putting the poems through a kind of algorithm or procedure. The work this week seems much more labor intensive, and yes. It really exposes the process of that labor.
Yeah.
So you might think to yourself when you read Day, well, that doesn't seem that hard. You're just retyping. Okay, give it a try and see how hard it really is.
Goldsmith teaches a course in which he asks the students to do retyping, and they find that it is really hard.
Really hard. If anyone's ever done...
You can't do it while watching a game on TV, or you can't do it while having a conversation with somebody.
Yeah. Even retyping the transcripts from soliloquy is incredibly labor intensive. So there is something about if you give yourself a moment to think about the labor of that writing, you might have another appreciation for the labor of all kinds of writing.
Yeah, good point. Ujwala, what do you think? Would you ever do something like that?
Well, I've done something like that in the sense that I've tried to write down things that people just say around me, like on a bus when I don't want to be disturbed and I have my earphone on with no music, but I'm listening to people.
So you're
and
cheating.
Just like,
you're giving them the impression you're listening to music, but you're listening to what they say.
Yes.
And
so
it's hard to do that.
It is, and I think the talk about labor intensiveness, I like photocopying stuff. I just like, you think it's mindless, but I like doing that thing because photocopying is something that you do without, much effort, but it also gives you so much time, and you're not even looking at words that much in that process. Yeah. But when you're doing this, like what Goldsmith does, you're still looking at words. And I don't know, words speak to you a certain way. I've done things after last week's class. I went into my computer, typed a word and then looked at all the Google posts that would come up and just tried to take out words. And for someone who's been struggling with writing, I feel like just interacting with words can do so much, and you discover things. So I would definitely do that.
Perfect merge of weeks 9 and 10. As David was pointing out earlier, there's so much of that. What you're doing is is in a sense what Flarf poetry did for the few years that Flarf was happening, which is to take the aleatory impulse to Google a word, and then the chapter 10 part is to actually do the labor of extracting the words and making something of it. That's really great. Thank you, Ujwala, everybody. Yeah. And now Jamie Fu is going to join us. Thank you, Jamie. Dave Poplar, and then we'll go to Amber Rose for the call. Dave Poplar, why? I want to throw something in from the Twitter. Dylan Kinnett, the Twitter. Dylan Kinnett writes, well, someone wrote a whole newspaper, but why? It's not like anybody's ever going to read it. He's fucking right.
Yeah.
Dylan's right. That's a great rejoinder. I don't know if Goldsmith ever said that as a rejoinder, but...
Well, and it's the question that you always ask, too, or I've heard you ask before. It's like, well, can anyone ever say that they've read the New York Times, actually?
And can they? I mean, no, not really.
Not really. There's a lot of words in the New York Times.
Ridiculous.
Except for the person who can say that they read the New York Times.
True.
The person
Your father.
The person who
New York
copy
Times.
edited the New York Times.
Oh yeah, there is one person every day.
Yeah.
And did Kenny Goldsmith's editor
Right. That's my question.
copy edit day?
Yeah.
Has anybody ever found it? That would be an interesting little expose.
That would be good.
Somebody reads all of day and finds all the mistakes and compares it with the September 1st in the year 2000, I think was the date. Okay. Dave Poplar, a thought on day, and then we'll go to Amber Rose.
What does it mean to read the New York Times, though? If I pick up the New York Times and I'm looking for sports scores and I get them, or I'm looking for current events and I get them, in a sense, I've read the Times. I mean, reading could be a whole bunch of different things. So, yeah, I mean, nobody reads it cover to cover if we think of reading in a very strict, complete way. But I think, I don't mean to be contrarian. Well, yeah.
What? Come on, Dave. People have watched 83 videos of you being a contrarian, and you're there 8 years later saying, well, I don't really mean to be a contrarian.
I was just trying to be a contrarian by saying I don't mean to be a contrarian. But just to push back a little bit on what Dylan said, I think there's a difference between what Kenny Goldsmith is doing in a meta-conceptual sense versus what we do when we say we've read the New York Times. I mean, the New York Times serves a purpose that can be, specifically informative, whereas Kenny is making an absolutely different point about what we mean by reading in a much different sense. I mean, I don't know if Kenny even thought what his purpose was before he decided to proceed with Day as a project. And I don't think you have to in a project like that. But it's interesting because then I think about, well, what's my purpose in reading a book like Day or reading a book like Soliloquy? I don't know until I go through that experience. And it's all a process of discovery, one way or the other.
Yeah. Well said, Dave. Thank you so much. Amber Rose, we have someone on the phone?
We do, yes. We have Melissa calling from Boston.
Oh, hello, Melissa.
Hello, Al. I have risen from the dead to call in.
Are you Melissa Silva?
Yes.
Oh, how are you? You're feeling
I'm good.
better?
I'm well.
You're okay?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, very good. You know, I'm going to shout out to you at the end of the webcast. You're like my final shout out. So you'll have to listen. Yeah. How are you?
I decided to call. I'm good. I'm well. And as I told you recently, I haven't been following this year, but I have been listening to some of the webcasts. And week 3 was a very interesting webcast where there was a question. It was almost about like the arc of the poetry we're studying, and we hadn't gotten to this section yet, obviously. I want to riff on what Phil said a little bit, because in some way, you could teach this course in terms of the relationship, the poet's relationship to the reader or listener. And you could dance around that through the whole course. And I actually really like the conceptual poets because they're ripping a wall off between the poet and the reader. And it doesn't start there. You talk about that a lot when we reach the language poets. And you could definitely say that Stein was so remarkable because so early on, she was asking the reader to work for it, work for the meaning that Phil had a eureka about. The part of what Goldsmith is talking about in that book, Day, part of what he said is that the challenge for the contemporary poet is very different than what it used to be. It's not so much creating language as finding language. That's a misquote. Mm-hmm. But it's like we're surrounded by words. And he has said he didn't expect anybody, even his best friends, to read Day.
Right.
The point was that he did it. And in some way, although I prefer Bach, what Goldsmith is
although
doing
you
is
prefer what?
Christian Bach.
Oh, Bach, right. Mm-hmm. Eunoia.
Yeah, of the uncreative
Yeah, well,
writers.
it's more, I mean, Eunoia is, sorry, Melissa, Eunoia is an aesthetic act. It's an act of finding, choosing, working. It's a high wire act. Goldsmith is a kind of, like a neo-Dada joke persistence. Like, I'm going to do this. So, yeah, I can see your preference there. Sorry.
No, that's the point. At the same time, I think Goldsmith is doing something ingenious because in some way he's putting, the Dada reference is correct, because he's putting a frame around words that we see every day.
Right.
And he's calling attention to the fact that we are now surrounded by words. And what does that mean to the poet? And if the poet has a different relationship to words in this time, which we do, then it implies a different relationship with the reader or listener. And yes. I think the whole course could even be approached that way.
Okay, Melissa, that's so great. I wonder if are you able to listen to the webcast if you hang up?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so you'll hang up, so we'll have somebody else call. But listen to the response. I'm going to ask Jamie, Max, and Jason to respond to really any part of what you said, but I'm particularly interested in Melissa's idea that the whole course could be shaped around the reader, the reader's experience. Melissa, thank you for calling, and listen to the shout out at the end, okay?
Melissa hung up, but on her behalf, I say thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ambrose. Okay, Jamie, Max, and Jason. Jamie, what do you think?
Hi. I'm Jamie.
Hello, Jamie.
I'm very taken by Melissa's point on putting a frame around words and giving attention, because I think week 10's poetry is very similar to week 9 in the sense that readers all have come out, I think, reading the poems with a new kind of attention on words. And I'm drawn to what Andrew Epstein, he said about everyday poetry, like this kind of poems help you to give more attention to bits of your life that you don't actually pay attention to. And I think that's what Kenny Goldsmith is actually doing when he puts all the words of the New York Times into one big book. So we pay attention to words that we don't actually pay attention to in a very democratic sense. Mm-hmm. And if we think about the relationship between poets and their readers, I think we can almost categorize it into how poets want us to draw attention to their words. Maybe that's a way we can think about this entire course as well.
Thank you, Jamie. Max, I really want to hear you on the question of readers. I mean, is Melissa right that the course, one of the subtexts of the course is the reader experience? Is that right? And what is that course teaching us?
She's absolutely right. And I think that's one of the pedagogical arcs of this course, right? Is to take us from Dickinson and Whitman, these canonical sort of larger than life figures who seem kind of incontrovertible in their way, and then over the century to sort of hand the baton from the poet to the reader, sort of the baton of meaning making, I suppose. And that's why we wind up so nicely here in week 10 with these poets that do exactly that, right? Who are thinking of poetry not as sort of creation out of nothing, but rather as reframing language, reframing experience, and making it something that anybody can do.
Thank you, Max. Here's the problem, Max and Jason. Max first, then Jason. Here's the problem. ModPo makes it seem inexorable. It makes it seem like that's where we were going. You know, there's this arc is the word that Max used. And of course, that's a lie. That's wrong. It was a tremendous amount of work for a lot of the poets, and so many poets we didn't include aren't interested in that work. They just wanted to retain the old relationship of writer to reader, which is, you know, I'm writing and you're reading, and don't crawl into my poem. You know, the opposite of Sid Corman. I'm not trying to detain you. I'm writing. I'm a writer. I don't need you. Sid is saying, I don't exist without you. That is a very radical statement, and it took a lot of work. It took him essentially self-exile in Japan, writing thousands and thousands of poems to be able to say, I'm really kind of misanthropic, but I need my readers wherever they are in America, you know? So that's the downside of ModPo, Max and Jason, isn't it? Which it makes it sound like it's inevitably getting from these Titanic, you're the reader, but you don't make the meaning experience of the 19th century, and moves inexorably forward. How do we make a course that shows how hard that was with all of the missteps? Probably, I guess we have to include a lot more poets who resisted that. I don't know, Max?
It would have to be a longer course. I think
would anybody stay if it were a 20-week course? I don't think so.
I think you have some people that certainly would stay. I think that if you were to stretch out all of the content, you would have more than a 20-week course.
Yeah,
if you
that's true.
Put everything in sequence and put the ModPo Plus back into the regular syllabus.
Yeah, you want to do that, Max? You're going to have to come back to Philly and be in a lot more videos if we're going to do that.
Make another round of videos. I think that not everybody is probably ready for that sort of a deep dive experience, but
we're all still recovering from 2012.
All right. Anyway, Jason, your thought on this?
Okay. Is my mic on? Yes. Yeah. I'm going to try to express this as clearly as I can. But in spending the day and the last years with the material of the course and ending on this material, this time what I noticed was almost a large distinction. Like you could kind of classify the poems of ModPo Plus and Week 10 into poems that are kind of critiques of society, politics, and commercial culture. Poems that I think really, in a way, the distinction that's important to me is the poems that see language as becoming almost a closed network, an infinitely closed network that the internet has kind of opened. Mm-hmm. But there are also poets here who are creating by twisting and turning and doing operations on the language that are that open new meanings. And so in thinking about that, I went and looked up the word creative in the Oxford English Dictionary.
Uh-oh.
And there, and so this, the use of the word creative tracks the role of the reader, at least in Western Europe, historically.
Yeah.
The first use of creative is, where is it? in, okay, 1612, what new existences are made by one Christ, by your productive, creative, and factive consecrations.
Factive?
Well, it's
Wow.
F-A-C-T-I,
Yeah, factive.
yeah. And then we have the divine, miraculous, creative power, heaven's creative hand. And we can think that until literacy began to spread, most people's experience of of a text was the Bible.
And not only that, but there was only one, let's just say, guy who got to count as creative.
Right, exactly.
That
and who
which-
created that
which
text.
created thing. And the metaphor or the analogy to the author as authorial came much later.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so the idea of reader almost doesn't apply to that time.
Not at all. It would be like Adam saying to God, co-creation, man. Doesn't happen.
Right. And
not Dan anyway.
No, and to listen to the word of God is to be filled with godliness.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to interpret it. You're supposed to just internalize the word.
Well, let me politely stop you there and say, I want to get to the phone and say something. I think in response to this, I think you're kind of affirming that idea that ModPo just finishes a long, long story, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think of Wallace Stevens, who said, Jason, now that, Chris, can you bring me down a little in the room? Now that, and I'm quoting Stevens, I'm not saying this myself.
Right.
Now that God is dead, right, we can have poetry. We can have the supreme fiction. We have to get rid of God in order for us really to enter the modern period and work on the analogy that you're suggesting goes way back really to the rise of the middle class, the rise of capitalism, and the sort of personalization of Christianity as having to do with the individual will and acts,
right.
creation of the individual.
Exactly.
So ModPo is sort of the last chapter
right.
of a long ModPo is the last chapter of a long, long history of the evolution of the idea of the creation being something that could be a poem made by a person.
Right, and what was so interesting is that you see, like, through the 1800s, early 1900s, creative being applied to art.
Right.
But then there's suddenly, in the early 1900s, a new use of creative, like 1987 Bottom Line magazine. Good creative for bank advertising is similar to any other creative. This creative was designed by agency Digital Outlook. And so there we have the merging or the resistance of the merging of language and capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Jason. That's absolutely right. And that's nice. It gave us a chance to talk very broadly about the history we're involved in here. Amber Rose, who's on the phone? First of all, Jamie Fu snaps for Jamie. That was great. And it's now time for Jamie, the other Jamie Albrecht, to come on up to the... Jamie's like, get me out of here. I want to sit back down. Okay, Amber Rose, who do we have on the phone?
We have the wonderful, the dedicated CTA, Anthony Watkins, on the phone.
Anthony Watkins.
My office hour buddy.
Hi, Anthony.
Hello, Al. Hello, everybody.
How are you? You said you were going to go to sleep before this webcast.
I was, but if I had it, I wouldn't have gotten to speak to Amber, which is just such a treat.
That's great. You guys are office hour buddies. How are you?
I'm well.
Good. Sorry I missed you the last time I came down to Florida.
That's right. You'll come back. We'll catch
I
you the
will
next
come back.
time.
I had to spend time with my dear mom, and when I said, "Well,
Oh.
Anthony Watkins and the gang, they would want me to come and talk about poem," and she looked at me cross-eyed. "You're not making me do that again," she said. But you got to meet my dad. You got to meet my dad.
Absolutely. He
Just a
was
few
such
months before he passed away.
wonderful guy.
Yeah, that was a
Yes.
fun session we had. And we've recorded that. We recorded
Yeah.
a long meet-up, close reading of a Phillip Whalen poem. I mean, forgive me, Anthony Watkins, I'm going to say something I don't mean to say against your hometown. I'm really sorry, but the idea of Phillip Whalen in West Palm Beach, that was like the perfect. That was so great. Anyway, you got to meet my dad. Do you have a question for us or a comment?
Well, a couple of different points about this arc. It seems to me that especially Emily, maybe not so much Walt, did open up and say, "Hey, come read my poem. Come make it your poem. Come find your own meaning." Maybe that isn't what Emily had in mind, but that's always the way I've ended up reading her poetry.
Great point. Great point.
And so, we end up in week 10, and you say, "Oh my God, this is 6,000 worlds away from Emily Dickinson's pretty little New England 19th century poetry." But is it?
Yeah.
In so many ways, it's not. It's just, which is why before I took ModPo, I would never read Emily, because to me it was just this silly, pointless poetry. And then you look at it and realize, no, she gave you a platform to find your own meanings. And obviously, when you get to computer-generated poetry, you get to conceptual poetry, it's more so.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely, she is the great-grandmother of us all.
Yeah. Anthony, I'm just tickled by this comment that you're making, partly because you're such a ModPo pro, because you're really doing the thing we like to do in this course, which is to look back on where the course started. So that was good. You've invited us to do that. And secondly, I'm tickled because the Anthony Watkins who first got involved with ModPo years ago was a lot more resistant. You as a poet, you've been fighting this. You've been thinking, is this the kind of poetry I want to write? And it's been a great fight. I mean, you're really working it through. And here we are talking about all this stuff, this wild stuff. So you don't have to. Yeah, go ahead.
I've still not become a ModPo poet.
Right.
I would love to. I don't think I have the ability to be that.
Well,
poet.
If I could put you together with Bernadette Mayer in a room for an hour, you'd come out thinking, I can do any of this stuff. Yeah. Anyway, Anthony Watkins, thank you for calling. I'm going to ask that you listen to our responses after you hang up. And thank you so much. And I hope you'll watch the Final Words webcast on Monday.
I will. Thank you.
All right. Take care. All right. I think that'll be our last caller, Amber Rose, for this evening.
Okay. Thanks, Al.
Okay. So thank you. So Jamie, Dave Poplar, I guess I want you to respond to this question of Whitman and Dickinson. I think you probably heard what Anthony said. I guess we might be able to start, and I'd like to add Max to this too. I think we might need to start with what he said about Walt, which is that we really need to look back at Walt and see him as very open, much more open than, because we're all fans of Dickinson at that point, and maybe it's time to think back on Walt. So actually, why don't we have Dave Poplar start since he's such a Whitman fan?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're often sort of taught to look at things and ask, what does this mean? And even with poetry, up before Walt, there were sonnets and romantic poetry, and before that, poems that were conveying meaning. But Walt seems especially to ask us to reconsider asking, what does this poem mean? And instead ask, what does this poem mean to me?
Yeah.
So I think that's what he's doing and bringing us in there. I think that was a great point what Anthony said.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave. Jamie, what are your thoughts on what he said?
I mean, I was thinking about the conversation we just had about the writer-reader relationship, and I was thinking about the possibility of illegibility in poetry being something that's opened up, and how at the beginning of the course we have the sheer volume of Whitman's writing, which sort of creates an illegibility because you can't possibly get through all that, and with the amount of time allotted, and then Dickinson being someone who sort of breaks meaning and you have to re-sew the words together, but then to Goldsmith sort of turning that and making all the language around us illegible and all the language around us inaccessible, and something you constantly have to interpolate with.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you, Jamie. Davey, your thought on this?
And expanding from Jamie, your thought along the lines of what makes something illegible or what makes something difficult is a question of sheer volume. We also often think of a difficult poem as being kind of opaque, or it's really far from speech, or it's a really exact representation of speech, and speech is weird. But something that's going on between the week 9 and week 10 poems is that in a week 9 poem, thinking about an everyday life project might be a way of like, how do I represent what happens to me in my daily life? And thinking about like Kenny Goldsmith's work in week 10 is a question of how do I represent everything that happens to me in my daily life? And how do I create a sheer volume of dailiness that helps deal with how unprocessable dailiness is, rather than how I might represent and create something really procedural and easy to represent in the week 9 poems. And I think thinking about Whitman as in that lineage, I wonder if we can think of parts of Leaves of Grass as a kind of everyday life project, interested in a kind of, this word is in my ears because it's in Amber Rose's ears right now, excess. And interested in...
Wait, are you sharing ears? What's happening?
Oh, it's just, yes.
We're just sharing brains.
Correct. We're just sharing brains.
I don't get it, but that's fine.
That's fine.
We'll
I
move
just
on.
think the word excess here is useful in dialogue with Jamie's thoughts about illegibility, that just like something being excessive, something being too much makes it hard to process. And that's the line that we see with Whitman. And I think there's a useful relationship between Whitman and Goldsmith, certainly.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so here's what I want to do. I'd like to play a Tracy Morris piece. And I think we should just let it sit there. I mean, we've all talked about it a lot, and it's in ModPo, and there have been any subsequent follow-up discussions. I'm not saying that you shouldn't mention it in your final words, but I just want to get it into the, as it were, into the record for tonight's conversation, this amazing piece, which is the way we end the course. And I really enjoy, we end the course, and the original video that we made at the end, I sort of improvisationally decided after we talked about Africa and this piece that she does. We talked about it around the table here in this room 7 years ago or 8, and then we decided just to say our own final words. Do you remember that video?
I do.
Yeah. And so many people comment. That was just so powerful. And I think it was Tracy who set us up for that. So I guess what I'm doing tonight is play some Tracy and then go around and get final words from everybody, brief final words, and you can use something that happens in the Tracy poem as a prompt, or you can say really anything that you want. So here's Tracy Morris, and this is an audio. The graduate ModPo seminar had Tracy in the room, and we watched a video performance of her at a conference in Arizona. This is a very different performance, and it's audio only. So here we go. Chris Martin, are you ready? Ready. Okay.
And the last poem I'm gonna read is started as a collaboration. I guess it's worth telling the story quickly. There's a sample that one of my collaborators, Val Gentil, who's a wonderful electronic drummer.
Val Gentil.
She had this little piece with the great Jeffrey Holder. Anybody know Jeffrey Holder? Tell your age. Nobody wants to know. All right. See the original Dr. Dolittle with Dick Van Dyke, and you'll see Jeffrey Holder.
Jeffrey Holder, that's the guy.
Anyways, tall, strapping black man with a beautiful voice. And he comes, I swear to God it's him, because it's a sort of singular voice. And he says, "It all started when we were brought here as slaves from Africa. very like Afro-Shakespearean diction.
That's Charles.
And so Val used that sample, and then I kind of did a vocalese based on that. And after that was recorded, I think it's in Mark's zine, you can still find it online. We did a collaboration, but we couldn't get the sample right, so it started as, it all started as we were brought here as slaves for Africa. And I was like, now you're doing my job, Jeffrey. And we could never sample it the way that he originally did it. It was strange. So I decided to do a poem found on Jeffrey Holder's reading of this one line in this piece that Val already did. That, I swear, that's how it happened. It all started when we were brought here as slaves from Africa. It all started when we were brought here as slaves from Africa. It all started when we were brought here as slaves from Africa. It all started when we all started when we were brought here as slaves from Africa. It all started when we were brought when we were brought here as slaves from Africa. It all said when we were Africa. It all started with Africa. It all started with Africa. It all started when we were Africa. It all started when we were Africa. It all started when we were brought here as slaves in Africa. It all started when we were brought here as slaves from Africa. It all started when we were Africa. It all started when we were Africa. It all started when we were Africa. It all started when we. Thank you.
Final words. Max, sorry I didn't cue you ahead of time. Final thought?
I was thinking about this poem earlier because I had a suspicion that you might end on it, Al. And what I was thinking about with respect to this poem and with respect to the rest of the texts for this week is there seems to be, across some of the conceptual writers we read, specifically Goldsmith and Christian Book, and also Erica Baum, I think quite specifically, there seems to be, and I'm going to just throw this out there and I won't have the time to unpack it properly, but maybe it's something to think on. There seems to be sort of anxiety about electronic archives and like digitization. And there's this like insistence on material texts, right? Like whether it's Goldsmith transcribing this, transcribing the newspaper or whatever, like creating these massive unreadable books that we were talking about earlier, or if it's Christian Book, like systematically going through the dictionary or something, which is a procedure that you could have a computer do. There seems to be like this resistance to like electronic archives and digitization, and this very almost like conservative, like modernist idea about like archives and the text. But what's interesting with Tracy Morris is she doesn't seem to share that same anxiety, and if anything, she sees like the way that Erica Baum sees in the old card catalogs a possibility for this like revelatory, unexpected meaning. Tracy Morris seems to see in sort of digital files and the corruption of digital files, and I think this is a comment I even made way back when. She seems to see in the corruption of digital files like a new potential for meaning making, and she seems to be embracing actually the potential that exists in electronic media in ways that I think the other poets are a little bit more hesitant to do, or may even seem to be reacting against. And there's this sort of glitchiness that seems to provide a new way of thinking about history, especially in this piece.
I think you have an essay to write here, Max, about this. I mean it. It's very interesting because, in a way, some of the conceptualists of the sort you're talking about, they're trying to bring kind of an artisanal, tightrope walking, bravura performance back. That's certainly what Buck is doing, Christian Buck.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And everybody cheers it, and it's to be cheered because it's an amazing performance, but it's not real, it's not current, it's not contemporary in a way. It's kind of a throwback. And Kenny Goldsmith is really not a neo-Dadaist. He's kind of a Dadaist. He's back there. He's interested
from like 100 years ago.
From Apollinaire and Duchamp up to Walter Benjamin, and that's where Kenny's interest really stops. He's interested in that kind of crazy hand-done archives. That's a really, really good point. Thank you, Max. Cool. Okay, Amber Rose, final thought, and then we'll go to Jamie.
A final thought. I also want to respond to the Tracy Morris poem briefly.
Please.
And I'll say that, I think this poem, for me, poem and performance for me, maybe more than any other, I think really aids in the conversation that we have all throughout ModPo about what form can do, and thinking critically about form. And I think this, you have me, you can see me. Okay. I think that this helps us extend the conversation to think critically about not just the form of the poem, but the form of performance and what taking a poem into performance can do. And I think that's a really critical conversation to have, especially because poems that are performed or performance poetry kind of gets a bad rep in the academy especially. And I think that this poem does a really beautiful job of showing how dynamic and how incredibly critical and essential it is to have this poem performed. And then just the other small thing that I want to say, I'm thinking about how I might teach this poem. Yeah. And I would love to teach it alongside Hortense Spiller's Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, where she talks about the beginning of Black diaspora coming out of transatlantic slavery not being a beginning, but being a rupture. And I think that this poem does that so well. I'd love to see those two things happen in a classroom at once.
Oh, it sounds great. And you don't mind if other people hearing that idea try it themselves?
No, please do, and come and talk to me about it.
Great. Thank you, Amber Rose. I would love to see you teach someday in like a regular classroom. You do teach here, but you know what I mean. Okay, Jamie, final thought, and then we'll go to Jason.
I was really interested in how Morris was sort of objecting to the lyric conception that you have to like pare down everything around you so you can find your internal voice, whatever that means, and how she was sort of putting forward this idea that the voice that we perceive is actually in the language all around us, and it's something that we find externally as opposed to internally, and how that kind of, I was really interested in that.
That's great. Thank you, Jamie. Jason, final thought.
I think that this might be my favorite poem, definitely of the course, and maybe ever.
This poem, the Tracy Morris, African.
This particular poem, and I don't think I've heard that performance before, which I think...
It's pretty great, isn't it? It was here in this room.
Yeah, and I think it ended on the word we, and I don't know if the original version ended on the word we.
They all end differently.
Right, and...
we. And she told me right before we filmed that first ModPo video on it, she said, we is we, as in we the people, all Americans, we. Mm-hmm. Reminds me of, let it not be like, let it not be like Hogg's. Claude McKay, sorry. Right. Reminds me so much of Claude McKay's insistence that this is about America, U.S. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, and I've always thought about the beginning, like starting with the pronoun it. It all started, like what all started. And in a way, the poem enacts the violent, brutal history that has ended up with the English language being taken for granted as a lingua franca, and that forcing of that language onto so many speakers of other languages was a brutal thing that we forget as we speak.
Yes. And that brutality, that disruption is something that Tracy wants to make in the form of the poem. Thank you, Jason. Dave Poplar, and then Anna.
Just a comment about VIA and FLARF poetry and Google Translate poetry. Has anybody seen The Good Place?
Yes, it's my favorite thing.
Yeah, I love that show. Do you know the character Derek?
Yes.
Wait, The Good Place, is that a TV show?
Uh-huh.
TV show. Kristen Bell, Ted Danson has a lot to do with
Ted Danson? No. You watch a show with Ted Danson?
Do not rain on this parade. It's my favorite show.
You would appreciate the show. They
Okay.
have
Has
a lot
he
of
mellowed at all? I
on
mean, he
staff.
seems like a jerk.
Anyway,
Are you with
there's
me?
a character on The Good Place named Derek, and his thing is he's just been created a minute before, just out of whole cloth, and he speaks as if he's just been created. So he's always speaking incorrectly. His words are really messed up. His diction's crazy. It's kind of funny to listen to him. Apparently, the writers, when they were writing his dialogue, they took what they wanted to say and they put it into Google Translate, and they translated it into another language and then into another language and then back into English.
And that was the script.
And that was what
And then the
he-
guy
they
had
used
to
as his
memorize
dialogue.
that?
Well, yeah, but that was his dialogue, and it's
Hard.
just I find it extremely interesting that to come up with something that sounds like it's emerging or a fledgling language, they actually sort of you could argue that they gave it more meaning. They made it more sophisticated. They're putting on more and more layers of meaning, and at the end of the day, what comes out is something that just seems extraordinarily raw.
Okay, so all we have to do is take the roster of people in the writing room for that show and collate it against the list of everyone who's ever taken ModPo, and you're going to find out that everybody in the writing room took ModPo, and that's all it is. Why didn't anybody laugh at that? That's a really great idea. What the hell's wrong with you people? Thank you, Amber Rose. Anna, final thought.
I had this whole thing I was going to say about African, but...
Please do. Come on.
No, there's something so good that happened in the forums that I just have to talk about that.
Okay, go ahead.
It's just one of those, like, completely amazing ModPo moments that I'm going to, like, weep. So, we had so many wonderful callers that we didn't get to any of the incredible questions that we had in the discussion forum. So please come here to the Webcast discussion thread and come hang out. There's so many good questions in here. And I'm trying to keep up with answering all of them, but there's also things happening here. But we were talking in here about mesostics in week 8 and what those poems can kind of tell us or teach us about week 10.
9.
I'm sorry, week 9. What they can tell us about week 10. And Michelle Bethke?
Yeah, Bethke, one of the CTAs.
One of the CTAs wrote this lovely, lovely piece about how the mesostic poetry in week 9 is such a great experiment, how we make poetry of our own and what that can tell us about week 10. She then quoted what Jeff Couch did in his mesostic poem.
By the way, Jeff Couch is amazing.
Amazing.
He's always giving us links, and he's like Mr. Metadata.
Yeah. So then she quoted what Jeff Couch did in his mesostic poem. I just wrote back to something Michelle said. And then a second later, Jeff Couch pops up and says, "Thanks, Michelle." And like, that is ModPo. That is ModPo. That is someone coming into a discussion post to say something great about a poem, quoting another person who they've noticed in the forum say something great, and that person being there too. We're all here and we're all doing this work together.
Small community.
And it's just so great. So
Small,
I just had
large
to
community.
cheer for that.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's so great. Davy Niddle, final thought.
Something that the Tracy Morris poem helps me think about is the impulse to narrativize the beginnings of things, to be able to say, and that language being attractive to Tracy, to want to linger in a poem with the language it all started, and that's such a common student position, that that's something our students are doing in the classroom, and in the literature classroom specifically, is trying to use literature to figure out how something started on many different scales. Something really exciting is happening in the back of the room, but I don't know what it is. Ambrose, what is it?
It's just that we're looking at Dave Poplar with his dog. I'm sorry, Davey.
I really want to.
Don't you hate it when
but
dogs
you're being
steal the
brilliant,
show?
Davey, and yes, graduate students
Pep
are
is a
starting.
smart dog, but he cannot be thinking what you're thinking. So
No, I'm
sorry
totally
to
paying
be
attention to Davey.
animalist, but I really
no,
would
you're
rather
fine.
hear Davey
No, you're
than look at the dog. Am I being too stern?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah. So just thinking about the student impulse to.
I noticed Dave has disappeared. Like, they disappeared,
Zach,
Dave.
Zach is still busy
Sorry,
looking at
Pep.
Dave Poplar's dog.
Sorry, Pep. I didn't mean that.
Pep, we love you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about student impulses to narrativize and to understand the partiality of wanting to be able to say when something started, that's necessarily incomplete, and that so many of the ModPo poems are so good at thinking about useful and unproductive incompletenesses in language. When do you need to be able to cordon something off to be able to tell a version of something?
Yes.
And when do you refuse that because it's necessarily an incomplete narrative? And Jason, what you were saying about the work that we can endlessly do trying to figure out what it is and how it operates and contextualizing it differently and therefore reading it differently, that's a poem that African is a poem that's so amazing to me because it's thinking about and lingering with the impulse to narrativize and the impossibility of it simultaneously.
No, that's great. I have two final thoughts, and one is really a shout out to Melissa Silva, who called earlier, and the other is a comment on the President of the United States. Forgive me. I just want to thank everybody's been so on tonight. Everybody has such great ideas, and the people in the forums and Twitter. It's just what a thoughtful group of people. And I especially want to thank the people who sat in this special chair. They all did amazing things. Yeah, this is just so heartening. It's heartening to think that people everywhere can gather around this crazy project, this free project, and be so thoughtful. Melissa Silver. So, one of the things that Coursera doesn't do in getting statistics for us is they don't ask people things like health, which it's a weird thing to ask, right? I mean, but I suppose in the sense of disability, in the sense of, that kind of diversity of health or lack of health or whatever situation, they don't know how to ask the question. I'm not sure. I wouldn't know how to ask. But over the years, I've noticed a disproportionate is not the right word, but a number of people who are at home, who, we used to call them shut in, who are disabled and therefore can't have access to institutions, maybe because they can't climb the steps, maybe because the classes are not set up for the hearing impaired, maybe because they're not considered to be eligible to be admitted to these institutions, whatever, all those biases that institutions of learning go by and are built on, really, in a lot of ways. And I just, I came across a note from Melissa, who's been fighting a chronic illness, has been bedridden. You heard her. She's amazing. When she was in bed, when she was really not active, that was the time she started writing poetry, and that's the time she did ModPo. Okay? First online, and then more recently she's been doing some other poetry courses, but staying with ModPo. And she says that she's afraid that that's why she tends to write too much poetry, meaning she because she's fighting this chronic illness and she's maybe not as active as she'd like to be, she's writing a lot of poetry and involved in these discussions. And she just wanted me to know, the other day she wrote this, November 11th, that someone here in Boston has asked me to be on his online podcast. This was yesterday, so November 10th, to recite my poetry and to read and discuss other poems and poets. And he was so pleased that I was able to discuss poetry the way I do. And this came because I have ModPo as a base. And she goes on to thank me and us. She calls me a mensch. And then she tells me not to ignore that because she doesn't want me to become arrogant. And Amber Rose laughs. Anyway, so there's a whole lot of people out there who, disability is a weird word. Let's just say not everyone is able to get into the institutions of learning where you're going to be surrounded by people this interesting and this thoughtful. And not only has Melissa got access to it, but she's one of those brilliant, thoughtful people. God damn it. So I'm just pleased about that. Now the president.
What a segue.
The guy is like, I'm sorry, I haven't said anything all season, but he's running around the White House apparently today, just furious that he lost or something. Maybe he's finally realized that it didn't go well, the election. Anyway, just the gloopy nothing that comes out of the mouth of this moron. It just reminds me of Yacht Blanc, so we're going to play Yacht Blanc. Aren't we going to play Yacht Blanc? We're going out on Yacht Blanc. But I want to thank everybody, right? Dave and Max. Max, Dave, thank you guys. And Chris Foreman for calling from L.A., and Phil, who has just had a revelation tonight, and Anthony Watkins, and Melissa Silva, and everybody here in the room, and all you fabulous people. So here's Yacht Blanc getting the final fucking word. Yes, Ray Maxwell, the final fucking word on what the president will say and do. Here we go. Chris, you ready?
Thank you. I was at this conference seance in CalArts in Los Angeles, and I met this writer, Madeline Gins, and I would like to present a short meditation on the title of one of her books. What the President Will Say and Do. 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 What the President will say do. What the President will send. 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 What the President will
Thank you. Good night, everybody. We'll see you at the Final Words webcast on Monday. In the meantime, get into the forums and talk to us. We love you all. Office hours are coming up. Jason's got one tonight. I've got one at 7:30 in the morning. Bye-bye, everybody.